Yes, it's time for emerging issues this week, B. We're going to look at yellow bin nights. Now, some people are going to be asking why, but I know in most of Australia, they have a yellow bin lid for their recycling bin, and we're getting to that stage of the NRL Fantasy season where we start need to recycle our cash cows.
Yeah, exactly right. And this is the part where if they've made the certain amount of money that you want them to make, which is that magic 10 points of value, around that round 1 through 6 is where you're hoping they'll have potentially peaked. And then you can start getting rid of them for another cash cow, as well as potentially picking up a gun who's fallen that same kind of price.
Certainly. So let's go through the situation that we're going to find ourselves in. So most coaches, I would imagine, they are going to be at least 11.5 million in team value going into round five, probably 12 million going into round six. It's at that point where we're going to have to map our way out to 13 million plus to build our final team value. But the challenge we've got in the coming weeks is we only have two trades until we get to round seven.
Yeah, exactly right. And this is where you kind of be very selective, I guess, of which cash cows you're wanting to recycle or which potential mid ranges, guns, whatever, might be losing their value and you need to jump off now.
Certainly. Now let's bring a player into the lens. Sandon Smith, a pretty decent player so far this season. We got him at 250, and he's probably going to be about 380k come lockout lift, which might come out after this video and podcast are launched. But a good way of looking at where they could potentially get to is looking at that projected average for that player, multiplying it by the magic number at the start of the season, which is 13.36. We do understand that it's probably less during the season, but we just want to keep it nice and simple. And Sandon Smith, he'll have a 20 in his rolling average. Do you think he's a play that's going to get to that 465 really quickly, or do you think he's going to crawl there to get that last 85k of value?
It's a hard one, isn't it? Because it depends on the Roosters' draw. Depends on if he's got the attacking stats. Because I know he made a lot of errors in this last game, which we'll get onto in the Roosters part of the podcast. But if those errors turn into line breaks or line break assists or anything like that, then all of a sudden he's scoring those big ones, and then the price is starting to move again. So I don't think he's an urgent sell, but I can also see, oh yeah, people might think his price is stalled, so he's the cash cow that you need to recycle to get onto someone like a Reece Walsh who's dropped 170 grand, or a Dave Fafita who's dropped $1 billion as well.
Yeah, you make a really good point about those players, and the fact that we've only got two trades until round seven means that, yeah, we've got to stagger these trades. We can't just flick them all out at the same time now, so maybe it might be Sandon Smith for others, but a few other considerations we have to look at, right, as to when we trade these and who we trade out. Now, obviously, for those that are listening to the podcast, you won't be able to see this, but on the YouTube, we've got a picture of Dylan Egan, the new superstar cash cow that we're going to have for the next few weeks. And when a player like this comes up, it probably prompts us to sell one of them. And I guess the question is, are we going to be comfortable maybe foregoing sort of that final 40, 50k of price rises if we've already scooped up 130 or 150k plus worth of them?
Yeah, I think in the first rounds 1 through 6, again, because you've only got the two trades, I think it's important to maximize almost as many trades as you can to make sure your cashies are the ones that you need to actually build that team value. Because once you get into the business end of the season, you've got more trades to use, but you can potentially navigate it a little bit easier. But this is where you build the cash right now. So yeah, you can't have them all. Example, I'm going to be missing out on Katoga from Parramatta, which was obviously a very good pickup this week. But I'm willing to miss out on him to get Dylan Egan, to get that cash generation. And then when Hamish Stewart's back, then Dylan Egan's potentially made that 150 grand, and then we start the process again.
Yeah, and you nailed it on the head there that you might not be able to get Katoga because you might have plenty centres, you might have plenty edges, or you just think that his price point is a little bit too high for what you're shopping for. Because the issue is, if you're, say, selling Sandon Smith, who we're speaking about here as the example, if you're selling him at 380 down to a Katoga who might, say, get to 320, you're actually only opening up 60k of salary cap.
That's it. And they could potentially average the same. But then you also got to ask yourself, who's got the better job security? We know Ryan Madison's and Bryce Cartwright's are in the wings for that edge spot. So it depends on your risk versus reward tolerance, I guess.
Certainly does. And the other factor we'll probably throw in here is those cut price keepers you mentioned there. When they're bottoming out, that might be the week that you make the move. But the other one as well is positional coverage. Now, we all joked at the start of the season that we had a team full of halves, and you probably could have started with 8 halves at the start and not been over balanced. But with a couple of these not looking as promising, say Tom Duffy, who a lot of coaches have traded, Does holding on to Sandon Smith for an extra week or two, so you've got that third or fourth half, come into it, or do you think there'll be another half that will pop up in a couple of weeks that'll be able to come in and be that depth player?
Yeah, look, positional depth is super important for me in my squad, which is why if I'm going to be getting rid of Sandon Smith and potentially Jack Cole, because let's face it, they're not keepers, I'm going to be wanting to turn those two into, again, the recycle value of a half like a Matt Burton or a Jerome Hughes, plus recycle into another cheapie. So I'm hoping that these guys can make that little bit extra cash so I can do that.
Yes, and Jack Cole, probably another good case in point as well. Big 66 for him this week. Now, with him, he's probably going to have a longer on-way, assuming he stays in the team. But with that now in his rolling average, we're probably going to try and squeeze as much juice out of that and then make sure we get off him before that 66 leaves the rolling average, unless he gets another big score in the coming weeks.
Yeah, exactly right. It's just one of those things that you monitor week to week. I don't think either of them are urgent sells. But as soon as you can see the price potentially dropping or their break even goes to something that's a little bit higher than what you think they're going to average, that's when you jump ship and find something different.
Yeah, so that's going to be the challenge for the coaches over the coming weeks. So key takeaways from this, obviously keep an exit on exit routes. Now we want to keep an eye on our exit routes and make sure we're concentrating. But the key thing is we don't want to try and skim every cent. If we can get 150k out of, say, the maximum 175k a cashy is going to make, we want to take that B, because if we sit there waiting for that 25k, sometimes it never actually arrives.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's where I'm looking at with my plans, which we'll go in with trades on our mind at the very end, where I might jump off a player. They might have 30k to make more, but I think there's going to be a player who's bottomed out who's going to make more than that, plus give me the scores that I want.
Yeah, perfect. But that wraps up this week's edition of Emerging Issues. Thank you to our YouTube viewers for checking this out. If you want to check out the full podcast, head to your favourite podcast platform and check out Talking League Podcast. Otherwise, be sure to like and subscribe.